Hello, everyone, and welcome to TEDxBerkeley 2024. My name is Christine Wakayama, and I'm one of the TEDxBerkeley curators.
And my name is Amy Song, the other TEDx curator, and we'll be your host for today.
This year's theme is Butterfly Effect. In its popular use, the butterfly effect speaks to the way small changes can have drastically larger consequences downstream. Meteorologist Edward Lorenz first identified this phenomenon in complex weather modeling, with small initial adjustments often leading to dramatically different results later on. His key insight, however, was that you could never predict which of these small changes would be significant. Ultimately, he named this uncertainty the butterfly. Rarely, though, are we ever isolating a single moment or choice. As creativity and innovation overflow, our global trajectory constantly shifts. Different lives overlap in a layered and complex network, and the degree of unpredictability surrounding our future and our present is greater than ever. At the same time, the potential for positive change and connection is also at its peak.
Today, we invite you to flutter between ideas as you consider how seemingly distant actions, motivations, and stories often intersect to create powerful impact. Before we dive into today's event, a few housekeeping announcements. To create a more interactive event, we have an open seating policy. At the end of each session, please gather all of your belongings, as you'll likely have a new seat when you return. Every session will start promptly, and returning to the theater during talks is prohibited, but allowed in between talks, so please arrive on time. No food or drinks are allowed in the auditorium except for water. No videography or flash photography is permitted at any time. To be fully present, we encourage you to minimize the use of other technologies. If you must use them, please sit at the back of the theater to avoid distracting those sitting around you.
Also, feel free to engage with our social media throughout the day. We'll be live posting on Facebook and Instagram as speakers present. Also, be sure to check out the photo booth at the entrance of the auditorium. Following the event, we'll be hosting a reception in Lower Sproul, the plaza area outside the entrance from Zellerbach Hall, from 5:30 to 7 p.m. This will be an excellent opportunity to mingle with other attendees, as well as the speakers themselves. We hope to see you there.
Next, we like to perform a land acknowledgement. The American Indian Graduate Program and the Office of Graduate Diversity recognizes that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of the Huichin, the original landscape of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This region continues to be of great importance to the Moekama Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We, as members of the Berkeley community, have a responsibility to acknowledge the right of understanding this land, as well as acknowledging of this ownership. We, as Berkeley members of the community, are here with consistent of our values of community, inclusivity, and diversity, recognize that we are on this land and obtain this land here right now. And as members of the Berkeley Graduate Division, we not only have a right and responsibility to understand the history of the land on which we stand, but also acknowledge that the members of the Moekama Ohlone tribe are alive and flourishing members of both the Berkeley and Bay Area today. Next, an introduction video on TEDx.
From Kenya to Colombia, from Iraq to Korea, in slums, in schools, in prisons, and in theaters, every day, people gather at TEDx events around the world to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. Today, you are part of a global conversation about our shared future. So what is this TEDx? TEDx is an initiative of the TED Conference, a nonprofit devoted to ideas worth spreading. We grant free licenses to allow TED-like events to spread globally. This event today is based on the TED Conference format and ideals, but is independently organized by your local community. So please make sure to thank the team of volunteers who worked so hard on today's event. It's their ideas, dedication, and time that made it all possible. It's they who booked all the speakers, and the views you'll hear today are, of course, those of those speakers, not necessarily of TEDs. But we hope their talks spark an exciting conversation among you. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for openness and for critical thinking, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you'll take out. And now, on with the show.
Today's event is structured into 2 sessions. Session 1, Dynamic Systems, sets the stage for butterfly effects, centered on systems' capacities for change. Dynamics capture how systems evolve over time. They're often used to track phenomena like population growth or to trace events like a chemical reaction or the motion of a celestial body. Even the simplest dynamical system, however, has to take into consideration uncertainty, a particular degree of randomness that can have unpredictable effects. In session 1, we hope to challenge some of the seemingly static structures that shape our world and introduce the variance needed to kindle change.
Our first speaker today is an Emmy-nominated filmmaker and author, celebrated for his masterful culinary creations. He was crowned a Rising Star Chef by the San Francisco Chronicle in 2017, joined Bravo's Top Chef in 2019, and after hosting ABC's Taste Buds Chefsgiving, he earned a James Beard Award nomination. Please welcome Chef 2, David Fu.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, technical difficulty. Good afternoon, everyone. I invite you guys to close your eyes. Trust me. Time out. Good afternoon, everyone. I invite everyone to close your eyes. We're going to take a little journey. Are your eyes closed? We're going to go back to our mother's kitchen. And in her mother's kitchen, notice how all of a sudden it got warm. It's a beautiful sign that she's cooking. For me, I think she's making ganjuo. It's a sour Vietnamese soup made primarily from pineapple and lemongrass. And I smell fresh lemongrass that she's picked from her garden. I hear chopping, stirring, and all of a sudden, the air is filled with this beautiful perfume. But the most beautiful thing is the dance that she coordinates in between her garden and her kitchen, as if it were choreographed. Bringing scraps from the kitchen into the garden, bringing scraps from the kitchen into our makeshift Oakland garden. A sign of a mini regenerative garden, her feeding the soil, bringing life back into that soil, not because it was trendy, but because she was taught to do so. And oftentimes, those same scraps are the same scraps that most restaurants in the Western world would throw out. Now open your eyes. My mother's garden was a testament to sustainable living. She understands the balance between giving and taking from the earth. She may not have the buzzwords It was something that was instilled in her, that was taught to her through stories and tradition. These actions isn't just knowledge, but a form of language of our family's heritage and identity. This is how I remember my mother's kitchen, because in our household, cooking is not just cooking, it's a living legacy of resilience, resourcefulness, and a reverence of food. I'm Chef 2 David Fu, Oakland native, a culinary creative, profoundly shaped by my Vietnamese heritage and the unwavering spirit of my refugee parents. My journey has taken in the form of my mother's apartment garden in Oakland to the bustling kitchens in America's finest and best kitchens. In my Emmy-nominated film Bloodline, I delve deep into the roots to celebrate the strength and wisdom of my refugee mother. It transcends food, highlighting the rich tapestry of generational wisdom and resilience. Every dish I create and every story I tell is imbued with the lessons learned from my family's journey and the flavors of my heritage.
In the US, it's about prime cuts, what looks pretty on a plate. So much is thrown away, which creates a bias of what's good. On Phu Quoc, we eat everything, bones, bloodline. But I actually learned how to eat this in Oakland. As a kid, Dad would bring home all the scraps. We didn't have much money, so we just see value in things that people wasted or threw away. My parents were able to make it into like a beautiful dish that nourished both myself and my sister. They never told us you have to eat this because we're refugees. It was, eat this because it tastes good.
That's my mom. I promise I won't cry. She is my mother. Beyond my mother, she's my superhero. She is a woman who has been raised in her youth in a multi-generational war zone and then ended up in a Thai refugee camp and then ended up in Oakland, California, working all of the demeaning jobs. She spent most of her career being a seamstress, getting paid under the table, and measured by the value and quality of her as a person by being paid by the pound, on how many linens she can sew in a week or a month. And if anything, I still admired her because what she was able to do in our home kitchen and feed and nourish my sister and I. But she didn't do it alone. That's my dad. I think I look like him. My father is a career-long fishmonger. And for us, it was a blessing because he was able to bring home fish scraps where the fish companies would throw away and dispose of, the markets wouldn't take. And from that, we made gold. We were able to make delicious meals for ourselves. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm considered a decent chef. And the thing he brought home the most was salmon. And just for reference, a salmon total weight weighs about 10.5 pounds, and only 70% of that salmon is utilized. Us being extremely resourceful, some call it sustainable, we use the other 30%. And off of each fish, we were able to get 4.5 pounds of this quote-unquote scraps. And those things are salmon collars that we baked, salmon skin that we turned into salmon chips, salmon frames that we would fry and get crispy, fish heads that we turn into stew, and braised salmon belly. for the things that we couldn't eat, this is where the magic happened. My mother put it into her own garden, rejuvenating the soil, bringing life back into that soil, giving it the nutrition that it would need. And from that, she was able to grow passion fruit, brown sugarcane, Thai bird's eye chilies, kumquats, guavas, planted by my mother's own hands. My mother transformed what was so often thrown out without a second thought in restaurants and kitchens. My mother's kitchen was a classroom where I learned about the virtuous cycle that created food that was so much more than the sum of its parts. And by doing so, she understood this, maybe not statistically, but its principles, that wasted food causes 58% of methane emissions from municipal solid waste landfills. Emissions from organic waste in landfills are 84 times more potent than those of carbon dioxide. And here's the big one. Wasting food in the U.S. causes greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to those of more than 50 million gas-powered passenger vehicles. That's me and my mom, or my mom and I. My mother transformed our garden to a safeguard against the hunger she once knew, turning it into a sanctuary of abundance. Her innovative approach in using food scraps to enrich the soil exemplified early regenerative agricultural practices. Her intuitive gardening not only rejuvenated our Oakland soil and combated our food injustice, but also left a lasting legacy for future generations. The soil remains a treasure, reflecting her unique contribution to addressing climate change, recognized by mainstream accolades. However, her true value doesn't lie in awards. She's my superhero. Ignited in me my passion to continue her remarkable legacy. Her methods teach us that our kitchens can be more than just a food assembly lines. They can be gardens that flourish under our care. This perspective shift encourages us to view the world not just as a resource, but to exploit, but as a home to nurture and cherish. In revisiting the roots of my heritage, I've been warmly embraced by my mother's enduring wisdom, reflecting both in her nurturing garden and welcoming kitchen. These spaces were not mere areas for meals or gardening. They were the heart of our home, where she imparted lessons of living in sync with nature and cherishing our resources. I can still smell the aromas of my mother's kitchen and hear her execute that precise and beautiful dance of movements in the kitchen. I carry them with me. I hope you can find bits of your own family's legacy with you, because it can change the world. As we conclude this journey, I invite each of you to explore profound wisdom in your own food heritage. Reflect on the sustainable practices embedded in your culture and consider how they can be applied to address today's environmental challenges. Let's not celebrate these ancestral teachings, but actively integrate them into our daily lives, whether it's adjourning the waste cooking method, supporting local systems, or sharing generational knowledge with others. Every small step contributes to larger change. Together, let's commit to creating a future that honors our past, nurtures our planet, and fosters a sustainable, inclusive world for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chef Tu. Our next speaker is an outspoken advocate for trans women of color and the disabled community. She has covered British Vogue's May 2023 issue, starred in Miley Cyrus's Mother's Daughter music video, and has graced billboards worldwide as the face of Moschino. She's also posed for Dove's United We Stand campaign and worked for industry titans including Jeremy Scott, Katie Grand, Tyler Mitchell, and Edward Enninful. Please give a hand for Aaron Rose Phillip.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure and my honor to be here with you all this afternoon. I am so grateful. My name is Aaron Rose Phillip. I'm 22 years old. I am a fashion model, an artist, a media personality, and a woman, amongst many other things. Some may call me a jack of all trades. Fashion has been one of the greatest parts of my life over the past 6 years, but has also been one of the biggest uphill battles. As a Black transsexual woman with quadriplegic cerebral palsy, and also as a wheelchair user, my career has always been geared towards showing that fashion, high or retail, is and should be for literally everybody. The fashion industry, though, is notoriously exclusive of many demographics of people, of those who are not wealthy, or not a celebrity, or not pale, able-bodied, or skinny. When I first started working, I was an anomaly to the industry. Arguably, in many ways today, really I still am. Some say that whatever happens from booking to booking or season to season for a model is just the nature of the game. Personally, I digress, and I think it's time to say the quiet part out loud. The fashion industry is unlikely to book or pay Black trans feminine and or physically disabled models to do runway, editorial, and or campaign because of an absence of whiteness, being able-bodied, or proximity to. So far, analyzing these disparities within the fashion industry has been an ongoing conversation, but also sort of hush-hush, and without any lasting or consistent changes actually ever made to address the problems at hand. I do believe that fashion should continue to embrace its nature as art, as expression, and as communication, just instead in a way that allows for all of us to elevate and have faith in ourselves and in our bodies, because it is so imperative. Over the years, during New York Fashion Week, I've been featured regularly in my agency's show packages and have been marketed towards clients every single season. The average amount of brands that show during New York Fashion Week is anywhere from between 75 to 100 brands and designers. That's a lot of brands and designers. Despite this, I have only ever confirmed and walked shows for 3 New York brands in 5 to 6 years. Let me quickly run that back. I have only walked shows in New York for 3 New York brands in 5 to 6 entire years. Mind you, this is New York, which is considered to be one of the most socially, ethnically, and culturally diverse cities in the world. So much for that. Again and again, my team and I have listened to brands say to us, "Oh, Aaron Rose doesn't have the right look for this season," or "she doesn't have the right look, period." But the thing is, everyone, is that they say this to me and my team every single season. It's not difficult at a point to read between those lines. Even in the moments when brands have said that they would love for me to walk a show initially, they have still come back and said, "Oh, actually, Aaron Rose, can you please sit front row for us?" Of course, I'm still grateful to participate in these kind of events, when even just a few years ago, it was a rarity within itself for a disabled person to even be able to attend a runway show because of the lack of access. But it's been frustrating and disheartening nonetheless to show up and to be told constantly that I can't do my literal job because of logistic reasons or liability reasons or whatever else, only to often find that the runways that I want to walk and that I've been demonstrated to walk are actually indeed fully physically accessible to me in my wheelchair. And that the logistic issues cited as reasons that I couldn't be a part of these shows to walk them don't actually exist at all. The reasons are fake. Oftentimes, these same brands will also ask me to film mini campaigns and trailers for these shows, even when I'm not in them. The work then turns into a gesture of representation and a very performative kind of inclusivity, rather than anything substantial or real. Brands will love to have me for social media content, for influencer jobs, for trailers, for mini jobs and mini campaigns, only existing on social media. But for the important work that truly stands the test of time and lasts, such as print magazine covers, campaigns, editorials, and the runway, it has been largely silent. I am not the first woman or model to have done this work, to have desired that the fashion industry be more inclusive towards disabled people. Jillian Mercado, the actress and model, was featured in a campaign for Diesel by Nicola Formichetti in 2014. And in March 2016, Mercado was announced as one of 3 models to appear at that time for the latest campaign for Beyoncé. In 2019, the academic, writer, disability activist, and my dear friend Sinead Burke appeared on the cover of the Forces for Change issue of British Vogue, guest edited by the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. In 2023, 4 years later, Burke, myself, actress Selma Blair, model Ellie Goldstein, and American Sign Language performer Justina Miles appeared on the covers of British Vogue's May issue titled Reframing Fashion. These issues and these covers, overseen by Edward Enninful, the European editorial director of Vogue, marked the first time that disabled women and models were ever featured on the cover of Vogue in the publication's entire history. Disability representation has improved. It really, really has, especially compared to when I started working. Black trans representation has also gradually made more appearances and strides in high fashion, particularly through the likes of and represented by talents such as Rishi Shazam, Gia Love, Zaya Wade, Connie Fleming, Dominique Jackson, Akobe, Gary Jones, India Moore, Lena Bloom, The Angelito Collective, Memphis Murphy, and Amara Extravaganza. But if we compare this demographic to even just the coverage of white transgender models across 2023, we will see a dramatic difference. And if we collect the number of covers with disabled representation, we will see even less. I want to note that the previous images shown are in no way meant to be critical, judgmental of, or vindictive towards the subject/models' pictures. The intentions for showing these images have nothing to do with any of these talents personally. I respect so much and love and enjoy my friends who are models, and I'm honored to be in friendships and sisterhood with many of them. This is not about criticizing them, but it is rather about showing real examples of the systems in play within the fashion industry and by brands overall that allow for costing inequities on the runways, in magazines, campaigns, and editorials with usage of talents. There is a serious inequity with how white trans models are able to work more than black trans models, and how able-bodied talents are able to work more than disabled talents. But of course, it is also true that while there is exclusion on a major level in the fashion industry, there have also been lovely examples of inclusion for disabled folks and also black trans folks in fashion. My career itself testifies to that very, very much. Jeremy Scott, when Jeremy Scott, creative director of Moschino, that brand is the only major luxury fashion brand to have ever featured a wheelchair-using, visibly disabled model on the runway during Fashion Month. That model being myself.
Hi, Jeremy. I love you. I'm here at the fitting. I just want to let you know that I just feel extremely, completely honored and flabbergasted and just, pumped. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. It's beautiful. I'm so gagged by all the clothes. It's looking really like some Skittles, and it just feels like heaven. So thank you for letting me be a part of your little heaven. I love you.
Thank you, everybody. After the Moschino show in 2021, I was honestly completely overwhelmed by the outpour of love and support that I received from the disabled community. I cried happy tears every day for a week, honestly. A large proportion of the disabled community loves fashion, but have gone most of their lives without ever seeing themselves properly represented in that space. People were reaching out to me from all over the world and messaging me things such as, "You make me see myself in the world where my disability is not seen. I can see myself in the world because of you." That really touched me. Other responses were more along the lines of, "Oh my God, you did it, this is real, we have a disabled model, and I've watched you manifest and work towards this for 4 to 5 years." To be seen and held by my community in that way really made me deeply emotional, and the gratification of knowing that my community loves and supports me means everything to me, because even though the fashion industry puts up a tough fight, our goals that we have are not impossible. You know, I used to want to model for the approval of the higher-ups in the fashion industry. I was young, and I wanted to really feel accepted by this world that I was so in love with and cared so much about. But I came to realize over time that they were making deliberate choices to exclude me. However, I will always know that even if the fashion industry doesn't see or understand what I have done in my career or for my community, that my community is beautiful and smart and kind, and that we will continue doing this work together to make the world a more equitable place. We are still able to accomplish monumental things so that our community can feel loved, seen, and respected worldwide. I feel like with the way things are now, unfortunately, I am one of a few faces of disability representation in fashion. I really hate that. I've spent a large portion of my career talking to media and interviews and press about how I don't want to be the only one working in high fashion work. I never wanted to ever be the only one. But because fashion has a reputation for being exclusive, they get to live and thrive in that narrative. They think they can get away with everything because it's an exclusive space and industry, so they can continue evading reality and instead selling fantasies. When in fact, all human life already exists in fashion. We all have bodies and ways of expressing ourselves, of presenting ourselves to this world and to each other. Earlier, I listed some of the other women in fashion in my community. There are so few of us, but we know our importance as women, as people who offer emotional and intellectual labor to this industry who has been so exclusive of us, and also to the world in general. Through this experience and through sisterhood, we are together. That unity is simply unbreakable. The industry has not made further efforts to include disabled people. It's sad. It's very sad, the situation. The fashion industry, in many ways, is backwards. I've been working in this field for 4 to 5 to 6 years now, honestly, and I'm too ambitious to see this field remain stagnant. The system of disbelief in disabled and or Black trans feminine talents not being beautiful, acceptable, desirable, or sellable in comparison to our white and or able-bodied counterparts. That system has to be demolished in order for equality to have space and grounds to truly bloom. These parts of ourselves that we are punished for, these things that we cannot control and these things that define us, should never be used against us. Across each of our bodies and each of our lives, we deserve to feel confident and secure in our beauty, and especially within our power. Thank you, UC Berkeley.
Thank you for a beautiful talk, Aaron. Our last speaker for this session is a physicist, musician, and author. His most recent publication, Quantum Reports, generalizes some aspects of quantum mechanics with a holistic model of space and time. He is also a multi-instrumentalist and professional performer of award-winning original music compositions. Please welcome Sky Nelson Isaacs.
Thank you. pixel is a point of light. If I take many points of light and put them next to each other, I get an image. The image is made of all these juxtaposed pixels. But a pixel is an isolated color, has no relationship to its neighbors, right? And it's self-sufficient. It's alone. But is that the only way to describe something? This image can actually be created a different way, from patterns. And these patterns are relational. They're not isolated, they're not alone, they're not independent. They affect each other. And this pattern here can be combined with this pattern, and this pattern, and more patterns. Thousands of patterns to create an image. Looks like chaos, but then you see the image appearing. It's so beautiful. The same image that we had before a minute ago, but out of patterns, not individual isolated pixels. So I think we can recognize that we look at the world sometimes as isolated pixels. We see ourselves as isolated. And there's another way to look at things. That's what guides my interest in research into this pattern-based Fourier transform approach to images and science. So you can see this all in order, in real time. It's just so beautiful to watch the patterns emerge into an image. If you compare the two side by side, you can see that it's the same amount of data. If you have 60,000 pixels, you need 60,000 patterns. Same result, different process. Equivalent data, different way of looking at the world. Isolated versus relational. So how does this work? Well, you can start with a pattern like this. You can represent it in what's called the frequency domain, like this, just 2 dots. And then this pattern here, for instance, would be represented by these 2 dots. And you're just placing dots on the screen in the frequency domain to match the pattern. It's an equivalent method, just different. So in the end, you get a bunch of dots on the screen. And these are, you can't recognize what this is, right? It just looks like a bunch of dots. It's code for this. And it's amazing that we can get something as complex as this, as detailed as this, just from a bunch of dots on the screen. But it's because they're all related to each other. Now, we can do fantastic things with this. We can edit this in new and different ways. Rather than take an eraser and erase a single building from a part of the screen, we can erase part of the frequency domain and filter out the edges. We can blur the edges all at once. So you're holistically toning down the contrast. You're not looking at each individual pixel. You can do it more, you get more blur, more blur. You can do it the other way too. You can take out the middle, highlight the edges. I found all the edges all at once without having to look and detail every single building. And if you wanted to remove a building from this picture, you couldn't do it with this process. Why? Because every building is related to every other building. And similarly, I wonder if we try and remove some person from our life, or some habit, some quality of ourself that we don't like, it has impacts everywhere. We are relational. There's aspects of each part of us everywhere. So this can actually be used in technology. This is a hologram. And I got really interested in holograms as a college student here, actually, many years ago, and at UC Berkeley. And we built one. And you shine a laser on the city image of the object, and it bounces to a piece of film. And then you shine a reference beam to the mirror, and it bounces off to the film. And they interact. They come together. And they form a pattern, like waves on the ocean, that you can't recognize. But when you shine a laser light on it again, you get a piece of film that has these markings. And you shine the laser light, you get an image of the city, as if it was really there. Now, it's an illusion. You can see the piece of film that's sitting there is what you're really looking at. But the image of the city seems to move across space, three-dimensionally. That's possible because the film captures the relationships, not just the individual characteristics of each pixel, the relationships between all the points in the scene. So here's what you think you're looking at, a piece of film. The triangle is a dot marking the center of the physical film in the actual world. And you can see the buildings that appear to be behind it in reference. And if I move to a different angle, the triangle stays in the center. What you're actually looking at is a triangle on the film, but the buildings appear to move. So what you think you're looking at, what you're actually looking at, may not be the same thing. That's what I love about this way of looking at things. Instead of assuming everything is exactly as it is written, as with pixels, everything is as it is in relationship to something else, the rest of the scene, with patterns. So if we start from pixels, we're asking an implicit question. How do we get something from nothing? How do I start with a blank canvas and put points on the screen, pieces of paint, to create something from my own head? But if we start from the whole pattern, we're asking a different question. How do we get something from everything? How do we create from the relationships across the field? And a rainbow is a great example of this. A rainbow is white light coming from behind you, from the sun, bouncing off the clouds and hitting your eyes. And in doing so, it spreads out. It refracts into red, blue, yellow, green. And those colors are really the removal of the other colors from the white. So you start with the whole pattern of white light. You remove red and green to reveal the blue. And in the same way, maybe we don't add stuff to our lives to become better people. We remove limitations, remove concepts that don't actually serve us to reveal the beauty inside of ourselves. A rainbow is beautiful because of what is not there. So our perspective can change with new information. As we saw the image of the city change from blur to sharp with new layers of pattern. And I had this experience this year that illustrated this to me personally. About 20 years ago, I was a high school teacher. And I did it for a number of years, and it's a very hard job. Some of you know. And I didn't feel like I was super good at it, didn't love it. And I left teaching, and I went and did a bunch of other things. And just last year, we got an invitation, my family, to go see the movie Oppenheimer. Remember when that movie came out? I was super excited because it's a bunch of physicists. Niels Bohr and J. Robert Oppenheimer, Frank Oppenheimer, Richard Feynman. And Frank Oppenheimer was one of my heroes. And in seeing the movie and seeing, it was a private family viewing, so we met some of the family of Frank. And I started realizing I think a lot like him. And I really admire his way of interacting with people, selfless and simple. And the joy of seeing other people understand something for the first time. And I started seeing myself again as a teacher. My identity was shifting to see that in myself. And not even a month later, an opportunity came up for me to take a job as a physics teacher at a high school. It was amazing. This whole thing was like a dream come true, seeing the movie and then getting the job. And so I recontextualized the past experience from like a failure to being the start of a long journey. And I'll tell you, I've developed tremors in the past year, and my students, I realize, accept me more than I ever have. It's been a real blessing. So I've learned a lot from that gift. And I want to consider this sentence to illustrate what I mean about patterns. The old train left the station. You're probably picturing an old, like an ancient, rundown locomotive pulling out of a depot. What if I change the sentence? The old train, the young. Old becomes an elder. The elders educate the youth. Train goes from being a locomotive to the act of education. The meaning of the first part of the sentence completely changes with the addition of additional information. Because as a whole, the sentence has a pattern embedded in it. Siri does this too. Did you know that? If you've ever talked to your phone and seen it write something, you're like, yeah, that's what I meant. And it changes it. Like, no, that's not what I meant. Keep it the way it was. Because it's reading what you said at the end and saying, oh, I think he might have said this, actually. There's context. So the end of the sentence changes the meaning of the beginning. So the next time you go to use Siri, remember the image of the city. You add layers of patterns, and you change the blurriness or the resolution. The next time you do that, remember the sentence about the train that changes meaning from a locomotive to education. And think this. As you make choices in your life, the meaning of every story that you carry can change as you take risks and try new things. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Sky, and thank you to all of the speakers from our first session. We'll be taking a brief 15-minute intermission, so please be sure to take your belongings with you, and we'll see you back here shortly for our next session at 4:15 p.m. sharp.
Welcome back, everybody, to our last session of the day. Session 2, Taking Flight, captures the butterfly notes of today's event, tracing the after effects of initial incitements of change. In this session, we explore how both old technologies and new are being utilized across ranging contexts and the ripple effects of experiences both small and large. While our butterflies are often invisible, the trajectories they create aren't. And we are excited to share with you some of the incredible stories that have bloomed downstream from the flaps of various butterfly wings. Before we begin with the rest of today's talks, we'd like to introduce Amay Love, eclectic singer and songwriter whose voice embodies a modern approach to blues, jazz, and R&B. Amay's debut solo album, Ripe, showcases smooth harmonies and was created with producer Stefan Broadley and stringmaster Melvin Brannon with the creator of The Simpsons, David Silverman. Please give a hand for Amay and her band.
Check. Once upon a time I believed in a story. You'll find my one and only and live forever joy. Like an undermine your delusions of glory and leave you sad and lonely, only to find sometimes what you thought you wanted doesn't feel like you think it should. Someday we may try to leave it all behind and go with what feels good. Come on home to the gospel of the soul. The truth is worth more than all the diamonds and the gold. And what I know, love is more than the story we're told. May I be so bold as to return what I've been sold. And come on home. Come on home, come on home, just come on home. Hey, we could spend our life just waiting on a fairy tale when the truest love is there right between your eyes. We might be surprised if we let go of the story. It's never as important as how it feels inside. Sometimes when your heart is broken, you're closer than you really know. Understanding love has a plan that we don't lead but follow. Come on home to the gospel of the soul. The truth is worth more than all the diamonds and the gold. What I know, love is more than the story we're told. May I be so bold as to return what I've been sold. Come on home, hey. When you feel alone, you have a home. There, deep in your soul, you know that you know. Love reaches much deeper, the deeper you go. Love beyond all reason if you choose to grow. Oh, and come on home, come on home, come on home, just come on home. Come on home, come on home, just come on home. Come on home. Hey, hey. Thank you so much. My name is Amay Love. I'm so honored to be here today. That song is called Gospel of the Soul. It's about really finding your own authentic truth. And this next song is called Best Yet for Me. And it's about really living in the full expression of that truth. So thank you so much. since I can remember, I dreamed love could last forever, but I never knew till I met you. No, that my heart could love so deeply someone I could trust completely. You're the one to make my dream come true. Better than my fantasy of everything that love could be. Now there's only one thing left to do, yeah, to make my life a testament to everything we represent. Show you my affection with my life's direction, 'cause you mean so much to me. You mean so much to me that I want you to see, and I want you to see the best yet for me. I wanna be, I'm gonna be, yeah, 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 the best I can be. You're gonna see the best yet from me. As a child, I dreamed of glory. I would tell the world my story. Now my happy ending is with you. No one knows me like you know me. When I lose my way, you'll show me never ending love that's ever new. And now I know this love is real. It's time to show this love I feel through the melodies that come through me, yeah. And through my prose it overflows, and in my song it finds a home. In your invitation lies my inspiration, 'cause you mean so much to me, yeah, that I want you to see, and I need you to see the best yet from me. I wanna be, I'm gonna be, yeah, yeah, the best I can be. You're gonna see the best yet from me. Da 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 da. Da 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 ba 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 da ba da 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 ba 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 da. The best yet for me. I wanna be, I'm gonna be, yeah, the best I can be. You're gonna see the best yet from me. The best yet from me. I wanna be, I'm gonna be, yeah, 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 the best I can be. You're gonna see the best yet from me, the best yet from me.
Thank you all so much. Give it up for my band, Noam, Travis, and Sam. Thank you, TEDx, for having us.
Thank you so much to Ame for her wonderful performance. Our first speaker for this session is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography and the Berkeley Center for New Media here at the University of California, Berkeley. In her research, she writes about cartography, digital media, and landscapes. And she's currently the principal investigator of Studio.geo, an experimental geographic research studio investigating questions about representation and visualization within technology. Please give a round of applause for Dr. Clancy Wilmott.
Hello. So this is a story, unsurprisingly, about a map. This map, part of an ongoing collaboration with the Segura Te Land Trust, an urban, Indigenous, women-led land trust based here in the Bay Area. This map, titled by Karina Gould, Before You Are Here, is 2.5 years in the making, thousands of hours by dozens of people. Most of us, we're pretty used to looking at maps. We see them every day on our phones. We see them on bus stops. We see them in our bookstores. A non-Indigenous Australian, it's me, born in Darkajung country, as a professor and a cartographer here at UC Berkeley, my job is pretty much maps. I was introduced to Segura Te in 2021 through the Berkeley Center for New Media's Indigenous Technologies program. Segura Te were interested in seeing whether or not a map could be made of the Bay Area which better represented from an Ohlone, or specifically Segura Te's perspective. Making a map of native land is never an easy task. We're used to seeing maps of the Bay that look particularly like this. But what is perhaps less familiar than this particular kind of map is that these maps enact particular worldviews which are deeply rooted in centuries of settler colonialism. Now, what do I mean by that? Really simply, these maps are the inheritors of the first maps made by Europeans of the Bay Area. People who came here, who were not from here, when there were already people here, Ohlone people. And specifically here in the East Bay, the Chochenyo-speaking people of Huichin, whose land we are on. It's really difficult as well to colonize without using maps. Maps were used during the Spanish and the Mexican era, and by the US to identify fertile land for agriculture, mineral deposits for mining, and to lay out plans for towns and even universities. But of course, every culture maps. The Rebelib charts of the Marshall Islanders used sticks and shells to show the currents and islands. The star compasses of the Carolinian navigators and their hand measurements help them follow the stars across the Pacific Ocean. Driftwood, hand-carved by Inuit people, helps them to trace the coastlines of Greenland in the dark by feeling the edges. And the songs of Indigenous Australians help map enormous desert spaces, songs that can be sort of tied together and traced for thousands of kilometres. Now, learning to read these maps, like all maps, requires decades of training and experience. But the difference between these maps and other or most non-Indigenous maps is that these maps are developed from the places that they map. And so they use systems and language that are deeply attuned to those particular environments. And so in approaching this map, the first question we ask Segura Te is, what are we mapping and why? We think maps are mostly about truth and accuracy, but the biggest challenge for cartographers is that the world is constantly shifting and changing. And we can't map everything in the world as it transforms, otherwise that map would just be the world. And so the way that cartographers deal with this is by freezing the world and then extracting selected information, such as rivers or roads, or in this case rocks, and presenting a particular version of that world. And so we asked Segura Tay, which version of the world did they want us to present? Segura Tay are Ohlone-led, but they're intertribal and multicultural, working to restore reciprocal relationships with the sacred land that we live on and the plants, animals, and other human beings that we share the land with. Much of this work happens through rematriation, that is, Indigenous women-led work that seeks to facilitate the return of land to native hands and stewardship. They have a growing collection of project sites, such as these two, where they work to restore native plants, grow food, and undertake cultural revitalization through language, environmental knowledge, and cultural practice. Cultural revitalization here is really important, because without the right language, it's difficult to express what the world is. This is a problem for cartography in particular, because native knowledges and languages often operate perpendicular to the way in which traditional cartography conceives of space and time. At the same time, Potawatomi cartographer Margaret Wickens-Pearce and Kanaka cartographer Renee Pualani-Lewis argue that maps are really useful means for bringing together Indigenous and non-Indigenous knowledges, but specifically that our responsibility is to learn what must be kept and what must be let go for one map moment in a time. Most of the historical records of the Bay Area come from settler documents such as surveys, maps, journals, mission letters, etc. But the way in which missionaries and explorers and governments saw the Bay Area was very different to the memories handed down generation after generation, the stories, the lived experiences and embodied knowledges that were described to us in our conversations with Segura Tay. It was clear that Segura Tay wanted us to make a map that built a world, rather than just reflected it. They wanted a map that could bring together what we knew and what we did not yet know, what is certain and uncertain, what is visible and invisible. And so rather than a kind of cartographic project, we began to approach Before You're Here as more of a cosmography, a way of worlding. And in doing so, in relinquishing cartography, we were able to craft a different kind of map that questions not just what we know, but how we know. And of course, the next question is not just what we are making a map of and why, but how should we go about making that map? For cartographers, it's mostly about questions of projection and orientation. Now, if you've ever looked at a map like this and wondered why Antarctica is so stretched out, or why Europe and North America is at the top, that's a question of projection. Projection determines how the map is arranged and from where we measure. Most mapping software uses coordinate systems that measure from the point at which the equator intersects with the prime meridian, which runs through the Royal Naval Observatory in Greenwich in the UK. Now, Segura Tay were not too thrilled about having their worldview measured from the heartland of the British Empire, fair, and asked us to instead measure from Lashorn, the first rematriated site down near San Leandro Creek in Oakland. But when we asked them, so what should be on the top? They answered our question with another question. Why do there have to be a top at all? Now, there are some maps that don't have tops, mostly of the polar regions, but trying to make a map of the Bay Area without a top pretty much broke all the cartographic software that we owned. And so we returned literally to the drawing board and spent months, starting with Lashorn at 00, stretching, warping, reorienting, deorienting, reprojecting the shoreline of the bay into a map that looked like this. Strange kind of planet. Once we were done with projection, the next question was perspective. From where should we look? And again, they turned it back on us. Why must we only look from one place? Again, cartographic software broke. And so we spent more months, going through historical surveys and sketches of the hills around the bay, to be able to craft a map that was able to combine the top-down view of the shoreline with a bird's-eye perspective of the hills, so you can look down and across from all angles from Lashorn. And then we combine that with a third perspective, up. Segura Te were adamant that we had to include the importance of seasons to Ohlone life. The seasons depicted through the stars embody not just the circularity of seasons, but also the way in which Janella LaRose describes them as bearing witness to the ongoingness of settler colonialism. And so we map the seasons, or the stars rather, as if you're standing from Lashorn, looking at every angle for the year 1578, the year before Francis Drake arrived up in Coast Miwok territory, the year before the Bay Area began to appear on European maps. It runs anti-clockwise, starting with the winter solstice over Tushtuk or Mount Diablo, before going onto the fall equinox, the summer solstice, the spring equinox, and the spring equinox. Of course, the bay also bears witness. These contours depict the original shape of the bay floor before gold mining up in the Sierras spent 350 million cubic metres worth of sediment into the bay. And the creeks were restored to their original pathways before they were redirected and culverted to make way for urban development. Finally, 425 shell mounds were mapped, shell mounds that dot the Bay Area, some still extant and some not. But we didn't want to freeze space either like cartography does, and instead we sought to collapse it, compressing it. Corinna Gould always reminds us that the Ohlone are a living people who are robustly and intentionally present, who drive Priuses and have iPhones. Furthermore, colonisation and repatriation are ongoing. And so we did this in a bunch of tiny little ways, but perhaps the most obvious are the icons. The Chinook salmon left, and we've depicted their recent return, waiting in the bay for the right temperature to continue their journey upstream. Mussel shells continue to reassert the existence of Ohlone people under the face of massive urban redevelopment, like that down at Bay Street, where the Emeryville shell mound once stood. The monarch butterflies have returned to Giltrap, up in Albany. Oysters, a testament to the impact that industrialisation and pollution have had on Ohlone foodways. Tule continues to be woven by Ohlone people into baskets and boats, and the acorns of the coast live oak continue to nourish local communities. But perhaps the most difficult thing about this map has been names or toponymy. Place names are some of the most intimate expressions of land and indigeneity. They're also sometimes the first things to be co-opted, captured, or erased by settler colonialism. And so the struggle was twofold. One, how do we deal with the vast array of names in different Ohlone languages, including Chochenyo, which Segura Te mostly works? And secondly, the really basic issue. The most fonts don't have the necessary glyphs, like this T minuscule, to be able to express Indigenous languages. And so for this map, the names around the outside were written by Deja Gould, who is the Chochenyo language holder for her tribe, the Confederated Villages of Lashorn, and also a member of the Segura Te Land Trust. And the font, Before You Are Here, was created by Diné topographer Noah Lee. Finally, all around the outside are the names of all the people who've worked with this project, but I know you can't see them. So I'll take this moment to thank everybody who has been involved, particularly the folks at Segura Te, Corinna, Deja, Janella, Ines, and Viola. Before I end, I have a small confession. This wasn't really a story about a map, even though it was a story about a map. It was really a story about what it means to represent worlds, our worlds and the worlds of others, and the consequences of the design choices and tools we make and use. It's also a story about Segura Te, about cultivation and repatriation, and about their vision of a Bay Area in which Ohlone language and ceremony are an active and thriving part of the cultural landscape, about their vision where Ohlone place names and history are both known and recognised, and where intertribal Indigenous communities have access to affordable housing, social services, cultural centres, and land on which to live and work. Before You Are Here is only one small part of that, but is the first of many maps that we hope to make which might help bring together different worldviews and might help us more deeply comprehend the complexity of both the past and present, and maybe, if we get lucky, try to imagine a different kind of future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilmott. I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, the Executive Director of AAPI Equity Alliance, Manjusha Kulkarni. In March 2020, she co-founded Stop AAPI Hate, which helped lead a national movement and racial reckoning that transformed understanding of the AAPI experience and brought substantive policy changes in California and across the country. She has been recognized on the Time 100 list of most influential people and is a 2021 Webby Social Movement of the Year awardee. She has shared her expertise with countless numbers of organizations, including the Aspen Institute, the World Bank, and the United Nations. Please welcome Manjusha Kulkarni.
Why do you foreigners come here and take our jobs? It was 1980, Montgomery, Alabama. Less than 30 years after the Montgomery bus boycott and 2 decades since the Civil Rights Movement, a movement in which Black leaders successfully championed the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and of greatest consequence for my family, the Immigration Act of 1965. I can picture her, a petite Indian woman dressed sharply in her gray wool suit, with suntan stockings and smart blue pumps, her long black hair pulled tightly into a neat bun. She sat in front of a panel of white male physicians, eager to answer their questions and demonstrate her qualifications. That she had immunized children in rural India and provided IUDs to poor women in Kansas City. But there would be none of that. Only the question that sought no answer. Why do you foreigners come here and take our jobs? She was always at the top of her class in elementary and high school. She was among those with the highest entrance exam scores, scores that enabled her to get into BJ Medical College in Pune, India. From early on, she had had her eyes on the prize, a white lab coat and stethoscope. All of it led her to that moment, in front of 20 glaring eyes and furrowed brows. Those men stood between her and her dream of practicing medicine. She cried in her husband's arms that night, hours after the younger girls had been tucked into bed, and down the hall from the 11-year-old who was working away on her pre-algebra homework. Fast forward 40 years. It's February 2020, Los Angeles, California. I'm not that 11-year-old girl anymore. I'm Manjusha Kulkarni, and I'm now Executive Director of AAPI Equity Alliance. I've just gotten an urgent call from one of my board members, Yvonne. The day before, the son of one of Yvonne's staff was called a coronavirus carrier and told, "Go back to China," as he was punched in the head and face 20 times by another student. Go back, go back, go back to India. How many times had I heard that growing up? According to Merriam-Webster, other is an adjective that means not the same as. More recently, it's become a verb. To other means to treat a person or group as alien to oneself or one's group. While the word may be new to American diction, the concept of othering is all too familiar to those of us in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. Othering has happened so often in American history that we even have a term for it: perpetual foreigner. The very first laws limiting immigration from any country were the Chinese Exclusion Acts, preventing individuals from China from coming to the US. Then came the Japanese American incarceration, where 120,000 were removed from their homes, their schools, their jobs, because they looked like the enemy. More recently, othering has happened after 9/11, where anyone who appeared Muslim was deemed a terrorist. South Asians, Sikhs, and Muslims were shot, beat up, and investigated by our government simply because of where we worshiped. When we as a nation exclude, incarcerate, and investigate individuals because of their race, religion, and national origin, we betray our values, and we cause real harm to our citizens. Back in 1980, my parents, Archana and Prakash Kulkarni, had a choice to make. They decided to fight. With the help of an attorney with the Southern Poverty Law Center, they sued the doctors who denied my mom a job because of her race. But it wasn't easy, as it meant countless hours of depositions and interrogatories, and it meant my father seeing the men who made those horrible remarks to his wife every morning in the hospital lobby when he made rounds in the neonatal unit. I can imagine his fear. Would he be able to keep his job? Would his kids be safe at school? It turns out it wasn't just mom. The University of Alabama at Birmingham had systematically denied positions to non-white immigrant doctors. And so my parents decided to bring a class action lawsuit. But their attorney warned them that the likelihood of success was remote because this was, after all, Alabama. White lab coats had simply replaced white hoods. In recent years, psychologists have learned that belonging is a universal human need. It's about connection to other people and also to place, power, and purpose. Belonging is essentially about acceptance, having our rightful place in our community and our country. After the 12-year-old was attacked on the schoolyard in 2020, I knew I had to do something. Along with Cynthia Che and Russell Jung, I co-founded Stop AAPI Hate to address anti-Asian racism. First, we had to figure out what was happening. Data from the FBI and other government sources didn't accurately reflect our community's experiences. And so we decided to do exactly that: track anti-Asian hate. The results were shocking. Over 11,000 hate acts from across all 50 states. Women having racist slurs hurled at them on the subway. Families being denied a table at a restaurant. And seniors being shoved onto the sidewalk. All acts of othering. After we understood what was happening, we had to figure out how to respond and how to prevent future acts of hate. And we had to change how our communities are being seen. Yes, we're doctors and engineers and tech workers, but we're also dancers and chefs and journalists. And we drive your cabs, and we deliver your takeout, and we clean your clothes. We're from the largest continent on Earth and the many islands in the biggest sea. We're from Samoa, Vietnam, China, Korea, and India, where Mom and Dad grew up. And we are American. As Americans, how can we stop betraying our values and stop harming our communities? It's called radical healing. And it's a framework developed by Black scholars like Breonna French and Gioni Lewis and others. Radical healing involves making individuals whole in the face of wounds. Wounds that happen when we're denied a job because of our race, when our kids are bullied in school, and when our grandparents are physically attacked. And the healing comes when we challenge unjust policies and we take care of our families and our communities. It's about integrating justice and wellness. And that's what we're trying to do at Stop AAPI Hate. Engage in radical healing for 24 million Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We've gotten 3 bills passed in the California legislature to ensure that bus stops and metro stations are safe and make certain that all customers are treated equally in grocery stores and restaurants. And right now, we are fighting against laws that prevent immigrant families from buying a home simply because they're from China. And we are also helping seniors find the courage to walk to the grocery store again and enabling women to fearlessly take public transit once more. Doing this, we create belonging. But this isn't just about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. All of us want and need to belong. We need connection to each other, and we deserve acceptance, no matter what we look like or where we worship. I know that we can stop hate. And I know that we can live out our values. But it takes all of us coming together to challenge injustice. And it takes all of us to care for our families and our communities, to ensure that all Americans can buy a home, no matter their national origin. And every American gets a job they deserve, regardless of their race. And it also means all of us working to make sure that none of our kids is bullied in school and all of our grandparents are safe. Because when we do that, we integrate justice and wellness, and we create belonging. And so, despite all of the odds, my parents won. Their case settled out of court with the racist doctors acknowledging their misdeeds. And it wasn't just Mom. The settlement of the class action lawsuit forced university hospitals to open residency opportunities to immigrant doctors across the state. And so my parents engaged in radical healing for my mom, for our family, and for thousands of doctors in Alabama. And so now it's impossible to conceive of a hospital anywhere in America without Asian American doctors. It's kind of like we belong. But Mom and Dad had to fight for it in Montgomery, and Stop AAPI Hate is fighting for it across our nation because we belong everywhere.
Thank you so much, Manjusha. This next speaker is an Olympic, world, and U.S. national champion track and field sprinter. She's an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and a mother. And while she's achieved incredible things on the track, she's also made great strides as a mental health advocate and has recently completed her master's degree in clinical mental health in order to help eradicate stigma surrounding mental health in her community. Please give a warm welcome to Natasha Hastings.
Let's try this again. All right. Well, in 2012, I was trying out for my second Olympic team. I had won an Olympic gold in 2008 in Beijing. So naturally, I had my sights set on number 2. But unfortunately, I wouldn't make the team in 2012. Now, I want to add, I made my first national team in 2003, and every year after that, up until 2012, I made every team. So to get to 2012 and not make the team, you can imagine I was devastated. I was ready to quit. I went home and started preparing my resume to apply to grad school and just at a loss. So my mom was there at the trials, which was nothing special. She was at just about every major championship there was. But this time, she would end up meeting a gentleman by the name of Alan Friedman. He sat near to my mom in the stands at the trials, and after seeing my performance in the finals, he went up to her and told her that he'd watched me over the years, he thought I had so much potential. He's a retired sports psychologist, and if I would allow it, he would love to work with me. So my mom took his phone number, and a couple months went by, and we finally had the conversation about what happened at the trials. And she said to me, "When I see you out there, you don't look like you believe that you belong out there. Do you not believe you're good enough?" I laughed and was like, "Of course I do." But she knew the truth, and she told me about meeting Dr. Friedman, and she felt that I would benefit from working with him. She gave me his phone number and said, "Do with it what you will." So, of course, I knew my mom was right, as much as I didn't want to admit it. So I'd end up using the phone number. And on my first conversation with Dr. Friedman, he asked me, "So what do you say to yourself when you're standing on the line?" I told him how scared I was. I told him how painful that last 100 meters was gonna be, how it was just 50 seconds of pain. I just went on and on about how terrible it was. And the line went silent, and then finally Dr. Friedman said, "My gosh, Natasha, you've lost the race before it even begun." From there, we began to work on the way that I spoke to myself, recognize negative thoughts when they happened, change them to positives, learn to develop optimism, and change my relationship with failure. I'd called Dr. Friedman to improve my performance, but he would end up giving me an even bigger gift. I quickly began to realize that while these thoughts were manifesting on the track and negatively impacting my performance, it was showing up in my everyday life, my relationships with my friends, my families, the way that I viewed myself beyond the track. It was showing up in every part of my life. So Dr. Friedman and I worked together on changing my approach to each race. Anytime we'd run into trouble, he'd work with me on changing my outlook, opening myself to the possibilities ahead. And when I talk about this, I try to be careful because I know that it sounds like it's really small changes, and they are. But with practice, those were the things that made a really big impact on my life and would change the course of my career. My performances would drastically improve, and my career went places that I couldn't have imagined. I went from not making the team in 2012. In 2013, I became the US champ. I ended this. I ended that season number 4 in the world. I'd go on to win more world championship titles, and ultimately, a gold medal at the 2016 Games in Rio. Thank y'all. Now fast forward to 2020. Right after Christmas, things would abruptly end between myself and my son's father. It's also an Olympic year. So now I'm a single mother with a baby that's completely dependent on me, and I'm trying to make an Olympic team just 10 months after giving birth. Good old mama again. I don't know what you're gonna do, but you need to get into therapy again. So this time now, I live in Austin, Texas. I have to do the search myself. I Google searched Black female therapist in Austin, Texas. You're laughing, there were no results. It was scarce, right? But I ended up taking a chance on this lady named Raisley because this time I knew I needed something different. I knew I needed someone that looked like me, someone that could understand my journey as a Black woman. And I vividly remember our first session. This time we were in person instead of on the phone. My son Liam is on my lap. I lay everything out, and then I sit back and I look at her and I'm like, now fix it. We still laugh about that to this day. But I'd continue seeing her every week. And finally, one week, while sitting in session, I had a thought. Could being a therapist be something that I want to do? Now, every athlete knows that the end is coming, but how we actually prepare for it is another story. I knew the end was nearing, but did I have my plan ironed out? With the sudden changes, not so much. But something in that moment made me think, this is what I need to be doing. So clearly, I've been here before. I've dealt with mental health struggles, so I've dealt with providers. I thought about my Black psychologist at the University of South Carolina. Dr. Friedman was an older white man. I worked with a spiritual advisor who was a white woman, and when I finally got to Raisley, she was one of very few. I began to think about the barriers that Black people, and particularly Black athletes, face when it comes to mental health, whether it be facing the stigmas in our communities or the notion that we as athletes don't have the same problems. I used to always tell this joke that sometimes athletes are kind of viewed as superheroes, but actually behind those big, cool, scary things that we do, we're fighting some of the same imposter syndrome and performance anxiety that the next person does. So as I thought about all of those previous practitioners, and whether they know it or not, they left a lasting impact on my life. And I knew that I needed to do something about it. I also thought about Simone Biles when she announced that she wasn't going to go forward in the Olympics. And I knew what it meant as a Black woman to make that decision at that level. The Olympics only comes every 4 years, and to say, I'm not okay, I can't do this, I knew that had to be tough. So I wondered, who fills the space? Who fills the space to support us, and what would it have looked like if there were more Black practitioners along the way? Would I have felt safer to ask for help? Would I have asked sooner? What would have made that difference for me? When I go out and talk to young girls, I preach about how we need more of us in the boardrooms and in the telling our stories from our lens and our experiences. We need women to influence the clauses in our contract when we need to have a baby. So as I sat on that couch, I realized that I needed to take my own advice, because I remembered the time that I called my corporate sponsor at almost 6 months pregnant to tell them that I was pregnant. And I remembered the feeling of relief when the woman on the other end of the line screamed, "Congratulations, and we're going to support you through this." So while sitting in that session, I said, okay, we're going to take our own advice. I didn't tell anyone. I went home. I researched clinical mental health programs. Then the world shut down with COVID. No one knew when the Olympics was going to happen, so I enrolled in school. So I finished my master's at the University of South Carolina. I'm now a counselor in the athletic department. Y'all are too kind. I work with our student athletes, and I've made it my mission to meet them where they are. I go out to practice, I hang out in the shadows and stay out of the way, but I want them to know that beyond the plays that they make, what I care about is the human beings making those plays. In my first session, I give the spiel. I'm a former student athlete, so I combine my lived experience with my clinical training to be of service. And then by the second or third session, someone comes back and says, "How come you didn't tell me you're an Olympic gold medalist?" And it's because it's not about me anymore. Now I'm here to help you find your voice, to help you change the narrative in your story. I know how hard it is as a star athlete, as a mother, as a person of color, to simply say, I'm not okay. I need help. Society says there isn't space for us to be vulnerable and to ask for help, or even a break. I understand the need for a space to feel safe and shed that superhero cape. A place where you don't have to perform and you can just be. I want my students, and even you listening today, to be aware of the way that you speak to yourself and the impact that it has on your journey. I lean a lot into that first session with Dr. Friedman. I think about the voices that echoed throughout my journey. Dr. Friedman helped me discover the most important voice, my voice. Now, my starting lines look a lot different: motherhood, relationships, new career, deadlines, TED Talks. Just as scary as the 400, probably even scarier. But now I tell myself, you've done hard things before, and you can do this again. So, what do you say at your starting lines? What do you say before that next job interview? What do you say to yourself before that next big project? What do you say to yourself when you fall short? Are you telling yourself it's going to be okay? Are you telling yourself you're gonna die the last 100 meters? Are you telling yourself you're prepared for this? Are you telling yourself it's gonna work out? I encourage you to speak positively to yourself, that you belong, to celebrate at the starting line, to fill your phrases with joy and courage, and to let it propel you to your finish line. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Our last speaker for the day is the co-founder and CEO of Scribe Therapeutics, a genetics medicine company using CRISPR to transform human health. This speaker was previously an Innovative Genomics Institute Entrepreneur Fellow in the lab of Nobel laureate and CRISPR co-founder Jennifer Doudna. He and his Scribe team pioneered CRISPR by Design, a data-driven design and engineering process ushering in a new era of in vivo CRISPR-based disease care treatments. Please give it up for Dr. Ben Oakes.
Good evening. My name is Benjamin Oakes, and it is an absolute pleasure to be back here at UC Berkeley, where I did my PhD. I love UC. Go Bears. And today, I'm going to change it up a little bit. We're going to talk about the future of medicine. So to begin, I want you all to imagine walking into your doctor's office. Think about what that process usually looks like. Now, I want you to imagine walking into your doctor's office and walking out a changed person. A healthy person. Healthier, at least. Imagine you could walk into your doctor's office and get a one-and-done treatment that could potentially modify, maybe even cure, your heart disease, diabetes, obesity, whatever it may be. That means no more pill every morning or every night, no shot every day or every week, no infusion every month. Sounds pretty incredible, right? I mean, come on. It also sounds incredibly difficult to do with where we are in our current field of medicine. And therefore, it seems like it's like, all right, Ben, it's incredibly far in the future. I get it. But it's not. This is the future of healthcare today. In fact, it is the reality of healthcare today, made possible by genome editing molecules such as CRISPR. Our health no longer need be dictated by our own genetic destiny. We now have the tools and technologies that will allow us to write our own stories to longer and healthier lives. So, what does genetic destiny actually mean in this context? I'm sure many of you know and have heard about evolution and the survival of the fittest, and therefore you think that maybe all of our genes are perfect. But I'm here to tell you today that that's not the case. It's far from it. Evolution is not survival of the fittest. It's survival of the just fit enough. And so what we see very often in evolution are things you can imagine or you could characterize as evolutionary hangovers. Genetics and evolution, they have a night on the town, they have a great time, they build a couple new genes, and then 100,000 years later, we're all paying for it. And that's because those genes, those traits, no longer suit the current environment that we live in. So this genetic adaptation, that is a constant process that we're watching and we can see and observe. But humans are really great at modifying our own environment. And we are now changing our own environment much faster than our genetic adaptations can keep up. An interesting example of this is actually the gene that's responsible for sickle cell disease. So some of you may be aware of this, but this is a single change in the genome. And if you have one copy of this change, it's actually potentially protective. It can help prevent bloodborne pathogens and a severe form of malaria. However, if our genetics overindulges again, and you have 2 copies of this gene, you now have sickle cell disease. So researchers have been very successful in finding many of these imperfections, and they're finding more and more, really every week and every day now. But nevertheless, traditional medicine has really focused on treating symptoms and not these causes. So I'm sure many of you have taken a pill before or know someone who takes a pill every day. Very often, this targets really the most downstream aspects of our biology, proteins. Now, recent advances are allowing us to move more upstream in this process towards, for example, mRNA, or utilize mRNA, and the COVID vaccines, of course, are a good example of this. But it is only recently that we finally have the ability to target the underlying code of disease, or our own genome. And it is only with this that we are now finally able to go from disease treatment to disease transformation. Again, CRISPR and genome editing technologies are what is allowing us to rewrite the story of disease. So, let's take a step back. I know, I've said CRISPR now twice, and I have not explained it, right? I'm sure many of you have heard of CRISPR because it is a technology that was co-invented by our very own Nobel Prize-winning UC Berkeley scientist and my PhD mentor, Jennifer Doudna. And if you know that, I'm sure you also understand that CRISPR is a technology that allows us to essentially build a molecule that can target nearly any location of the genome in nearly any organism. It's incredible. It's programmable. It's efficient. But what I bet you don't know is the fact that these CRISPR systems are actually bacterial immune systems. They're what bacteria uses to fight off viruses. And because of that, they're not genome editing tools. They have shortcomings. Now, despite this, they are changing healthcare, they are changing agriculture, medicine, biotechnology. Anything that in any way touches biology is changed by the ability of CRISPR to programmably modify the genome. And in fact, CRISPR genome editing has moved now from bench to bedside in just over a decade. Recently, we have gotten approvals in the US and Europe for a treatment for that disease I was talking about earlier, sickle cell. Now, if you have seen this data, it is amazing. It's transformative. It appears to be nothing short of a functional cure. And I believe that more cures are possible if we can really engineer these bacterial immune systems into more perfect genome editing scalpels. So, I believe this, of course. I've been working on this. I've been working on this for a very long time. I actually started out working on engineering genome editing tools for over a decade ago, back BC, or before CRISPR technology. Yeah, that's actually what it stands for now. When Jennifer published her seminal work in 2012, though, I immediately saw the value in this technology and moved out to UC Berkeley to work with Jennifer Doudna, as well as another UC Berkeley professor, Dave Savage. In their labs, I worked on engineering a number of really interesting and unique CRISPR molecules that could do all sorts of things, many of which you could see here. And when I graduated, I became one of the first Innovative Genomics Institute's entrepreneurial fellows. And in that process, I honed my mission with a real focus on unlocking the potential now of genetic medicine by engineering CRISPR specifically for that goal. What this means is really taking these bacterial immune systems, melting them down, melting down this natural material, and reforging it into the more perfect genome editing scalpel that can cut more specifically, more actively, can be more easily delivered. And our ultimate goal is to create genetic medicines that are safe and effective enough to be used at scale. No longer are we thinking just about treating rare disease, but how do we bring genetic medicine to each and every one of you in a way that can more meaningfully impact your life? The ultimate goal here is really creating treatments that have the potential to be a standard of care. The first treatment, potentially, that you can get. And so, we blueprinted a company called Scribe and an approach called CRISPR by Design. Again, co-founded by myself, Jennifer Doudna, Dave Savage, as well as Brett Stahl. And our goal has been to engineer these genome editing tools to be more potent, safe, and effective. So what does CRISPR by Design actually look like? How do we do this? How do we make a more effective genome editing tool? What we actually have done is we can look at tens of thousands to tens of millions of different possibilities, test each one, track whether or not that modification improves the system or hurts the system. We can then incorporate all of these changes into a single, more perfect genome editing tool. An interesting way to think about this is that we are essentially doing holistic molecular engineering at the nanoscale to transform human health at the macro scale. I mean, talk about a butterfly effect here, right? Now, with CRISPR by Design enabling us to create safer and more effective tools, the question becomes, where do we apply these technologies? And so I have a question for the audience now. If you know, or you yourself have been affected by cardiovascular disease or heart disease, or someone in your family has, or you know someone who has, please raise your hand. All right, I want everyone to look around now. Keep your hands up, come on, come on. This room is so full of hands, even the people who are like this. Because cardiovascular disease, you can put them down now, thank you. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death globally. It has much less fanfare than things like cancer, but it beats it out almost 2 to 1. And so this really seemed like the area that we could have the most impact. Now, of course, cardiovascular disease has a standard of care. What is known as LDL-C, or bad cholesterol, is a key contributing factor of cardiovascular disease, and there are pills that we can take to lower our bad cholesterol. But really, only less than 50% of people can remain on these treatments, this standard of care, for a long period of time. And this is why we have over 2 billion people globally who still have high cholesterol. Now, on the flip side of this, we do understand the genetics that allow us to modify and lower bad cholesterol. And if we could use that knowledge to lower LDL-C by greater than 50%, we could have a meaningful impact on cardiovascular disease and heart attacks globally. If we did that in the United States alone, we would save over $25 billion in cost to the healthcare system each year. Now, at Scribe, we set out to do this, and lo and behold, we have been quite successful. By engineering CRISPR tools to be more potent and safe, what we have been able to demonstrate clearly in large animal models is that we can reduce cholesterol levels by over 50%, and that this treatment is stable now, out for 6 months. This is exciting because this has the potential to become a new standard of care for anyone who has had a heart attack and potentially, in the future, who's at risk for cardiovascular disease. So this is a testament to what the future of genetic medicine can look like. We no longer are going to be limited to just treating rare diseases, which must be treated as well, but also to creating standard of care treatments for the broadest diseases possible, enabling all of us to think about writing our own stories rather than just inheriting them. And so the fascinating question I want you all to think about is, what does that future look like for each of you? Now, I want to end by saying this is a deeply personal mission for me. My father, who you can see here, has had 3 heart attacks. First one was at the age of 40. I still remember having to carve my own Pinewood Derby car while he was in the hospital. And I often think about what would have been different. How would his life be different today if he had been treated with the therapy like this immediately after that first heart attack? Could we have avoided his second heart attack, his third? If we had treated him earlier, could we have avoided even his first? It's certainly possible. And I think about this even more because I share that same genetic destiny, and so does my son. I'm sure many of you share these same questions. And so once again, I ask, how do you think that genetic medicine such as this could impact your lives or the lives of your loved ones? And how do we ensure that that future comes to be? Now, the good news is that we are working on this each and every day to give each of us the ability to rewrite our own genetic destiny. There will be a future in which you can visit your doctor and walk out healthier. I am sure of that. Perhaps we even get rid of the paradigm of taking a handful of pills in the morning and a handful of pills at night. Like, wouldn't that be great? But to get there, we have to engineer not only our own biology, but the tools that allow us to engineer that biology. And this is what I am deeply committed and passionate about, and we are dedicated to at Scribe, engineering a more empowered future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ben Oakes, and thank you to you all for joining us today.
Next, we'd like to thank all of our student volunteers. They make this event possible, and we're so grateful for all their help. Also, thank you to Andrea, Beth, and Elizabeth from the Financial Aid and Scholarship Office for their continued support of our event. We'd also like to thank McCune, our production company, and Genevieve, our stage manager, for keeping us on time today, as well as Christine, our event manager here at Zellerbach, for all of her support leading up to and through this event. Next, we want to thank our core organizing team. First, thank you to our incredible co-curator, Renee. Wait, one sec. And thank you also to the 14 other student team members who have worked over the past months to put this event together.
Yes. Thank you to Brandon, Maddie, Malena, Adia, Elena, Elva, Jenny, Joy, Angel, Dine, Emmanuel, Hatal, Lily, and Maggie.
And I want to give a special thank you to our 3 curators, Amy Song, who I've watched grow up in this organization to become an amazing leader, Christine Wakayama, who is one of my first friends here at UC Berkeley. She's poured her heart and soul into this organization. And of course, Renee, the #1 supporter of TEDxBerkeley. This event does not run without her. So give it up for these 3.
And last, thank you again to all of you for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed all the talks, and we want to say thank you again for celebrating ideas worth spreading. Have a good night.
Oh, we're going. Oh.